Attention, everybody. The views and opinions expressed on this show are not necessarily those of Axe Ministry, Axe Media Group, and or their affiliate and subordinate ministries and or nonprofits. Here he is. It's that time. Crime Time with Dr. Steve Albrecht.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks to producer Jeff as well. Welcome to Crime Time. This is Crime Time episode 55. I'm Dr. Steve Albrecht, joining you from the Axe Media Group studios in Springfield, Missouri. Rainy Springfield, Missouri today, also kind of cold too. Going to talk about two things today. One, I wrote an article a long time ago for a police magazine called If I Were a Crook. And this article says, here's the stuff that I would do as a former cop if I was actually a bad guy. And these are the easy ways to rip people off, to steal stuff, steal your stuff, and to do it in ways that's kind of clever and interesting. If you want to sort of parallel to this, think about the movie Ocean's 8. If you saw it, it had Sandra Bullock in it and a lot of other cool actresses. And it was a sequel to the mini sequels, Ocean's 11, Ocean's 12, Ocean's 13. It was kind of a prequel, actually. Sandra Bullock and Awkwafina and some other cool actresses. Really fun film. The beginning of that movie is her, Sandra Bullock, ripping off a major department store and a big hotel in New York City by using some good social engineering techniques. So that's what some of these guys do. The cops always say we always catch the dumb ones. We don't catch the smart ones. Here's an example. I've got a number of examples for you today about how smart crooks are certain times, what we need to do to make sure we protect ourselves from these guys. Second, I wrote a book with my partner, Bob May, called Stay Safe at Work, Your Ultimate Guide to Workplace Safety and Security. The book is really a collection of all things to keep you safe at work. The problem is nobody's back at work right now. So the book's out on Amazon, Kindle. You can certainly get it, but we're really going to step on the gas pedal to promote and market the book next year when people get back to work, hopefully go back into their offices. So I'll talk about a couple things today. One is the If I Were a Crook article, and then the second is I'll talk about the book Stay Safe at Work. So thanks for joining me on Crime Time today, where we talk about crime and crooks and cops and personal security, and we talk about some dangerous people and lots of heroes and even a few stupid crooks. Today, I've got a good stupid crook story. Most importantly, I talked about what you can do to keep yourself and your family safe from crime and violence. And as always, you need to be vigilant at home and in your neighborhood, at work, in your community, certainly with your kids at school, and even on the road. The show exists to make you feel more empowered, more secure, and more educated about the criminal justice system and safety and security issues in your own life. As background, I worked for the San Diego PD for 15 years as a patrol officer, a reserve sergeant, and a domestic violence investigator. I now work as a training consultant. I teach live programs and Zoom workshops focusing on HR, human resources, employee coaching, workplace violence, and security and safety issues at work. I've written 23 books, finishing 24 as we speak this week here, a book on police leadership, 24 books on police and business and workplace subjects, and guns. You can find all of the books on Amazon. My 3 gun books are available on Amazon Kindle. That's Albrecht on Guns, Volume 1, Albrecht and Farrow on Guns, Volume 2, and Albrecht on Guns, Volume 3. Working on the 4th gun book as well. That should be out probably in January. You can always reach me at my website, crimetimeradio.com, where you can send me an email. You can connect with me on LinkedIn, connect with me on Twitter, at Dr. Steve Albrecht, ALBRECHT, and you can follow me on Twitter for as much as you like to. We have good past episodes on SoundCloud, the audio version of the show, and certainly new ones post every Tuesday at this time on YouTube and Facebook. So thanks for joining me today. Let's talk about John, is that you?
Oh, yeah, it's John Cowling here. Who's this?
John, Steve Albrecht. How are you, my friend?
Oh, very well, thank you. Sorry I missed your call.
No
I
worries.
was working away and had the phone on silent.
Are we ready to go? Because we're live on right now.
Yeah, sure. Let me turn on Skype. What application, sorry?
Okay. Yeah, we're live right now. So let me give you a little while folks are doing that. Let me give you a little a background on you to everybody while you're getting all set. Is that okay?
Yeah, if you want to switch to an application like Skype, I think I'll just say phone.
Yeah, you're good the way you are. Just if you're on the phone, it's great with us for Skype.
Okay.
Okay, stand by, John. Let me give a little introduction here. Our guest today, our surprise guest, I was going to go without him, but he's here and I want to talk to him, so this is great timing and perfect to get John in here. John Cowling, District Security Manager for a large organization in Dubai. He is an expert on international security, international travel, and he's a longtime security manager, originally from Australia. All business is global, and the security business faces challenges overseas that are similar and very different from what we see in the United States. So John has worked as a prison officer in Australia, and he transitioned into the corporate security world. His work has taken him all over the world. He now works and lives with his family in Dubai. John has deployed to Algeria. This list is amazing here. Australia, Bahrain, Egypt, Gabon. Is that how I pronounce it, John? Gabon?
Correct, yeah.
India, Indonesia, Iraq, Jordan, Kenya, Kuwait, Lebanon, Libya, Norway, Oman. I like you have them in alphabetical order, John. That helps. Pakistan, Philippines, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Singapore, South Africa, South Korea, Spain, Turkey, United Arab Emirates, the UK, USA, Vietnam, and Yemen. So John is a security expert in a variety of issues, and I want to talk to him about what life is like in Dubai, in kind of daily life in Dubai, what things happen in life in Dubai, and also what his sort of challenges are being in the Middle East, and also what he sees as he looks at the United States election in terms of what may happen coming on to the first of the year in terms of COVID and what security challenges he sees and is facing. So John, welcome to Crime Time. Thanks for coming on with me, my friend.
Oh, look, thank you very much for having me. It's always a pleasure to talk to you.
And I appreciate, John did a great interview with me with the International Security Journal. You can find that online. I'm featured on there, and he does all the hard work, asking me some great questions about workplace violence. And so I did a great interview with him, a video interview on International Security Journal. So, John, good day, mate, and hope we didn't keep you away from your family. I think it's 7:15 or so in the evening where you are in Dubai.
Yeah, that's correct. But my wife's not here right now, so I've got all the time in the world. So I've got a leave pass to talk as long as I want.
There you go. So we'll still about 40 minutes of your time today. So give us a sense, John, because the folks that listen to me, I think, don't have a lot of sense of what Dubai is like compared to other more restrictive Middle Eastern countries. I mean, Dubai is certainly perceived, at least from my perception and the things that I've read and seen, as fairly liberal, maybe not the right word, but maybe more forgiving of freedoms and whatnot compared to, say, Saudi Arabia or more stern Middle Eastern countries. Give us a sense of what daily life is in Dubai, and also what restrictions women have there compared to maybe other Middle Eastern countries.
Thanks, Steve. So the first thing is, yes, Dubai is probably the least restrictive of what's referred to as the Gulf Cooperation Council, or the GCC, and that includes Saudi, Bahrain, Kuwait, Oman, and the UAE. And these are effectively five nations that are have tribal ties, intermarriage ties, a bit like having sort of an extended family. So a lot of them operate similarly, but the UAE, of which Dubai is both the name of the emirate or the state as well as the capital city of that state, is probably the least restrictive and therefore in many ways the destination of everybody regionally and extending into places like Egypt and Jordan and so forth and Iraq, where people come to party, come to have a vacation. So therefore it is probably the least restrictive. Go on.
So is it also maybe in terms of, well, it's hard to sort of compare it to Saudi Arabia in terms of dollars, but I mean it is a very rich country, at least for the people that control the money, as Dubai. I mean it's not a poor country. You look at the building and the resorts and the malls and the immense apartment buildings and hotels. I mean it is a fairly rich country in comparison to maybe its neighbors.
So the UAE is probably better off than some of its neighbours, with the exception of Saudi, because there's so much oil in Saudi. Although the UAE recognised probably 30 years ago, long before I arrived, that you can't rely upon a single sector for your economy. You have to diversify. So hence, there was a huge building and construction boom, which is sort of we're hitting the tail end of now, and the UAE and particularly Dubai have really pushed tourism for not just the region but for the globe. So, there's a whole range of theme parks and water parks and tourist-style destinations as a way of ensuring the economy is not relying on a single sector. And kind of why is that important for security professionals? And that comes back to understanding that who we work with and for needs to have a kind of a global and diverse view because of all the challenges that we face.
And how does the country of Dubai, the leaders, the Defense Department, the people that work in police and security functions, how do they perceive themselves as a terror target from other Middle Eastern countries that they may have disagreements with? I mean, are they perceived as a terror target because of the Western influence and the tourism and things like that? A more possibility of a terrorism target?
So having worked with some of the local entities, they're very aware of the regional, so I guess, geopolitics, who are our neighbours and what's the potential threats. And over the years, certainly people like Dubai Police and Abu Dhabi military have become very, very good at preempting issues and discovering what's going on. And that's kind of, I guess, part of the tightness of controls they have over here. So, so for example, we have a national ID system which is linked to, your driver's license and everything, right through to almost hotel booking. So, there's a lot that goes on behind the scenes, and in many ways, it's a little bit like the Western world. And in fact, I'm going to quote the Abu Dhabi chief of police from a few years ago, where he said, they don't really care with expatriates what goes on behind closed doors. But if we get called to help resolve perhaps a crime or a problem, we're going to look at you in fine detail. So that's kind of a good, I guess, expatriate, kind of advice that I would give people is, probably nothing's going to go wrong, or there's less crime over here and there's less issues. But when it does go wrong, it's going to go wrong in a big way. So, keep yourselves, keep your noses clean, so to speak, is always sort of good advice for me.
So people coming from Western countries, America and Europe, can they drink alcohol in Dubai in public and at bars and such?
Yeah, look, so tourists can certainly go drink in hotels. So it's alcohol licenses for an establishment is linked typically, or almost exclusively, to a hotel. So you won't find a local corner bar, but you'll find a hotel that has a bar. So for those people that want to come over here and enjoy a drink, then absolutely yes, you can go buy alcohol from a licensed alcohol shop. And of course that means you have to register and get effectively an ID card as a liquor license. So there are a few more restrictions than perhaps other parts of the world that we're used to, but it's a fully functioning society with pretty much everything that has to offer. We just realised that roughly 85% of the residents are expatriates, which means at some stage you're going to go home, and hopefully you go home on your terms and not because you've been silly and got in trouble.
So if you're an expatriate in Dubai, are there any immigration issues like in certain countries? I think of like Panama, for example. You have to go home to whatever your home is for some span of time, like 30 days. Or is there anything connected to immigration? And that's my first question. And my second question, I hate people that ask compound questions, so I'm going to do it to you anyway, is do they use immigration as one of their primary security tools to say who we allow into the country is critically important? So the first question is do you have to leave as an expatriate from time to time before you can come back? And the second is, how do they use immigration to keep the country safe?
So the first question is, you don't have to leave, but you do have to be in country a certain number of days to maintain your residence. There's a lot of people I know who from COVID have had residency in this country, had to find a way to come back about every 6 months to come in for a couple of weeks to maintain their residency, but there's no requirement to go home, so to speak. Although typically people go to their home country once a year or once every couple of years, and in fact, a lot of single expatriates don't go home for a few years because they're taking their holidays somewhere else in the world because they have this adaptability and flexibility to travel. To your second question around immigration, look, there's bearing in mind that 85% or roughly are foreigners, expatriates, and to be a resident as a foreigner here in the UAE, there are certain criteria that you need to follow. So one of them is you need to have a valid reason, which is either basically a tourist, a retiree on a special visa, or you have a job here. And if you don't meet one of those three criteria, then there's no social security network here for the foreigners. That's only for the nationals, for the citizens of the country. So therefore, the immigration is used as a filter to keep undesirables out. So let's say that tomorrow I was convicted of a crime and I spent a jail term, I'd be deported because I no longer sort of meet the criteria of having a work visa around being a fit and proper person, and then I wouldn't be able to return. So certainly they use immigration as some filters to keep undesirables out. But however, I'm not aware of the criteria behind a tourist visa in terms of, are they checking your background from your home country? I think that as a tourist, it's fairly straightforward and open to come in.
So just to go back to your home country for a second in terms of using immigration as a leverage tool for security, I'm reminded that one of the big chiefs of the Hells Angels motorcycle gang, I don't remember what state he was from, but he was one of their top echelon guys, flew all the way down to Australia to go to some big biker rally in Australia. And they did, of course, background on him. And as soon as he got off the plane, they said, "You're not welcome here." And they put him on the plane and he had to fly home. So he was actually in Australia, if you count being on the airport. I think there was like 30 minutes between when he got off the flight and when he was actually on the airport ground. And then he got back on the flight back to the United States. So they shipped him back home, toot sweet, in about 30 minutes. I thought that was an impressive use of immigration as a leverage tool against certain undesirable cats with long prison records.
Well, look, absolutely, and he would have been classified under the aviation security criteria most likely as a inadmissible person. So he was not able to be admitted into the country versus a deportation, which is when you're already here and you've committed some offence and then you'll be returned to your country of passport. So certainly the UAE is a signatory to many of these international conventions and information sharing. So I would imagine that, similar circumstances would occur. And in fact, just recently it was reported in the local newspapers that a couple of hundred immigrant workers from Asian countries had been detained at the airport with incorrect documentation. They'd reportedly come on a visa when actually, in fact, they were looking for work and they'd come on the wrong visa. So, the UAE government and intelligence forces tend to work pretty well. They're very mature. And in fact, the UAE military has the nickname with the Western forces as Little Sparta. So that might be indication of how strong they are.
So if you look at the boom of the building boom that you talked about, and we've seen photographs of these beautiful high rises and hotels and skyscrapers. I think some of the tallest buildings on the planet are in Dubai, are they not?
Yes.
How did they get
How
did they get the workers in? There's sort of a green light process that says we need foreign builders, construction people, folks that can drag tools around and build stuff. There's a time span where they allow those folks in.
Yeah, so it's with any sort of growth sector, there's going to be some challenges. And one of them, as you rightly said, was how do we bring in literally tens of thousands of workers to build, and that's often where, certainly in the construction sector, and it sort of flows into security. A lot of people get very much pigeonholed into a particular role, whether it be a tradesman or so forth. And it's a bit like having an ant colony with thousands of worker ants who are given a single task: go and do it, come back. So they've done quite well, and the vast majority have come from countries such as India, Pakistan, Philippines, Nepal, those sort of countries where the wages that they receive are of high value in their home country, and they're relatively, closer than some of the other countries. So, there's been this big influx, and it's not just this country; it's across the whole region, and it's certainly, places like, Saudi and Qatar and Kuwait to some extent have adopted the same sort of model.
So if you look at Dubai geographically, there's water on one side, correct? And
Correct.
they're bordered by other countries. So is border security, with a kind of a border patrol and water security, whether it's the Navy or some sort of water, enforcement group, how does that all work in terms of protecting the borders of that country?
So, because the bordering countries, Saudi and Oman, are part of the GCC, the Gulf Cooperation Council, and in fact, it's a bit like living next to your cousin or your brother. They've got very, very strong ties, and they've got some quite advanced border protection, both technology and systems in terms of manpower and people. So, if you having worked in a few of these countries. Some of the equipment is, literally over the horizon technology, whether it be cameras or radar or so forth. So, and there's a lot of cooperation that goes on sort of between it all. And then, when you talk about some of the physical security, there's various layers in terms of fences or walls or natural features. So, it's quite impressive as to how they all work together.
And you're a port security guy by some background. You've worked in port security, and how do you perceive the port security in Dubai? There's a sort of a Coast Guard or a Navy, or how do they protect the port and what comes in and out through water?
So yeah, look, that's a bit of a challenge because it's you've got this mix of government sort of public agencies who look after border protection. And then some of the ports are run by private enterprise, so therefore, some of the port security ends up being privatised just by the way that the model is. And certainly the UAE has all of these layers. They have a Coast Guard, they have a Navy, they have a constant presence by foreign Western navies who come in to refuel and do R&R in the ports and so forth. So there's this huge presence. Not just in the UAE, but in neighbouring Bahrain and other countries around, these navies that are always, this presence that's always here. And it works fairly efficiently, having done some of the work around the region. The biggest challenge is a lot of the documentation or the conversations are in Arabic. Once you've got a good interpreter, then you can miss out on some of the finer details.
Right. And if you look at the new peace deals that Trump has been creating, we've got 4 or 5 countries, including now Sudan, that just came on board with an established relationship with the United States and Israel. What sense do you have when you look at some of the signings here? I mean, it seems pretty dramatic to me that we're looking at I don't know, it's not the next Arab Spring certainly, but a positive movement in terms of these countries that have had an antagonistic relationship with Israel since 1949. What's your sense as you look at these peace deals coming on board? Is there some validity there? Is this posturing, or is it a positive thing? How do you see it?
Well, I mean, first off, there are, I guess, straight away there are some positive elements. In any sort of conflict management, you want to be able to talk to the people that you're in conflict with and come to some sort of resolution. It's a bit like having a big family, then you've been arguing with your uncle for the last 50 years. At some stage, you've got to come to some sort of resolution. Now, of course, Israel has had, strong regional ties, perhaps not as visible as it is now, for many, many years. And so we've got, several countries, including the UAE, who recognised Israel. But of course, that's then upset, another uncle in the family being Palestine. So, I think it's a step forward in the right direction. I guess the uncertainty is the elections coming up in a few weeks. How does that change things? Whether whichever person becomes the president, and therefore the leadership and the direction, does it remain the same? Does it change? And I think some of the concern is more around having stable leadership and therefore stable decisions, and not having decisions change at a moment's notice without which creates uncertainty. So the fact that Israel has been recognised, is a great achievement for the region. Not being party to it, I don't really know how much influence the US had on this, but I know certainly that they've been talking for a long time, and collaborating on things like information sharing in relation to countries like Iran and so forth. And all of that's gone through the US. So I think the next sort of couple of weeks will really define that relationship, and hopefully we'll get visibility on a lot more of the benefits that are available.
Well, we're a mere 7 days out from the election, if you can imagine that, and it's quite the topic of conversation in the United States, as you can guess, on social media for sure. And I look at these peace agreements in a positive way, certainly, and I'm always looking for how these people who have been together for centuries, millennium, can get together, and one of the biggest ways, of course, as you know from your work, is commerce. So I see a lot of. I think Trump said he would take Sudan off the state-sponsored terrorist list if they signed this agreement to recognize Israel and create a more of a commerce relationship. And so there's benefits. I mean, in terms of foreign aid that we provide to them, but look at the sort of the business reasons for these decisions. And I think there's some smarter heads in some of these countries that say, look, we don't have to love Israel, but we can certainly do things that benefit us economically. Israel, as is the creator of a lot of patents and a lot of things, electronic technology and things. Really they're the sort of the Silicon Valley of the Mideast in some ways in perspective. It's just really about commerce. And so I look at people complain about China, and I did a lot of work for Boeing back in the old days, and Boeing would send their plans for a wing for a 737. And it would be manufactured in China and put on a ship and shipped across from China back to Seattle to be installed on a jet airplane. And so he said, why are we giving this technology to China that so they know how to build our airplane wings? Well, it's about business. I mean, do you see the sort of the global business desire to engage in commerce kind of wins out after a while?
Look, yes is the short answer, and I think that commerce is a great motivator, incentive to sort of to do this sort of as a vehicle, as a platform for what's the word? For change, I guess, for positive change. I mean, it's interesting because across the water is the big foe Iran, and yet certainly when the GCPOA, when the Joint Comprehensive Plan was, the flavour of the month a few years ago, and the former administration, and it was all going forward. I mean, the amount of money that Iran has available to spend is absolutely phenomenal, and some of the biggest companies in the world were fighting over each other to get into Iran to grab a piece of the action. And now that's all changed, and it's become a little bit, a lot more restrictive. Everyone's put this on hold. So certainly commerce is a great incentive, and certainly in this region, rightly or wrongly, and there's a whole bunch of factors around that, emotions get as the hurdle to overcome. And with the emotions comes the legacy of, like you were saying, the last millennium of the last 1,000 years of, he said, she said, you shot my brother, I shot your brother, and all this kind of, I guess, tribal sort of conflict. And it's not just for these countries. Iraq's going through it, Yemen's going through it. Iraq's had armed civil conflict since every 5 to 10 years since 1930. So to get a country like that out of that sort of cycle of violence, which is embedded in the culture, is really difficult. And I think that the fact that the UAE doesn't have that, hasn't had that, and they're in a much, much stronger position to lead the region in terms of positive change.
I wanted to talk about your career and where you've been a little bit, but I'm reminded of a book I read after 9/11. It was recommended to me by a terrorism expert. And I don't remember the author, but he was an Arabic scholar, an Arabic man, and the book was called The Arab Mind. Do you know the book?
Yeah, I do, yeah.
And one of them, he told the story about the horse thief, and there was some reporter was talking to some Arab, tribal leader, and there was somebody that was doing some sort of menial work for him off to the side, and he said, "Who's that guy?" And he said, "Oh, that's the horse thief." And he said, "Why do you call them a horse thief?" And he said, "Well, his family stole horses from my family." And the reporter said, "When was that?" And he said, "About 700 BC or something like that." It was a few years ago, and so he's still referred to as the horse thief, which is, I guess you rob one bank, you're a bank robber, right, John?
Yeah, look, absolutely, and yeah, that's quite an accurate statement in terms of, and that's something that I always encourage other security professionals to realise, is that when you're working in this region, people will give you a label, and you want to make sure that the label is the label that you want it to be, and not like a horse thief as in somebody else's a label. So that's absolutely apt, and that's just the way the region works. So I worked in Iraq, and I was in Mosul last December, and I met a gentleman who is now a good friend, and his nickname in Arabic is so much more beautiful sounding than the English translation, but the English translation literally means assassin of Daesh fighters.
Wow.
And this man, is a strong leader and is a strong person in his community and very well respected. And that nickname's probably never going to leave him. And it's not a bad nickname to have either.
So if you look at your passport, you probably have a passport that's probably about 5 inches thick because it's got so many pages of places that you've been where it's stamped.
A couple of them, yeah.
And then you look at this collection. I mean, Norway at one end of the spectrum, and South Korea and Spain. If you look at all the places you've been in your career, and it's fascinating. There's. I mean, I look at myself and I say I thought I was fairly well sort of a gentleman traveler, but not compared to you. Where's your favorite place of these almost 30 places that you've been to? Where's the best place you've ever been to where you say this is paradise? Besides your home in Australia, of course.
So it's kind of weird because in different places you get different experiences, and I think it's all based on the people you meet. So a couple of them come to mind. I was in Hodeidah, Yemen, and it was 2012-13. I spent some time down there, and one of those memories was going through a market, watching 3-year-olds wash clothes in the gutter, in the dirty water in the gutter, and you think, well, how do I help this person? The answer is you really can't, because they're one of a million people, and by doing so would put your security detail and everybody else around you at risk. So I think it's the rewarding experiences, and then it's just being baffled by being in Tripoli, Libya, and I went to lunch. I was taken to lunch on the last day by my security team, who were all sort of government, militia, policemen, call them whoever you want. And we're in this seafood restaurant along the Corniche, along the seaside area. And, it's full of policemen, and, it's a typical sort of, every town's got a cafe or a restaurant where all the policemen and law enforcement visit. And this was obviously the restaurant in town. And this guy comes in he's in uniform, and everyone waves and says hello in Arabic, and they all have a bit of a laugh. And I said, oh, who's this guy? Oh, he's one of the detail's brother. And I said, oh, okay, what's his name? So I can say hello, be polite. And they said, Obama. And I said, oh, don't you mean Obama? And everyone laughed and goes, no. And the translator said, no, it's Obama. And I'm like, okay, there's a story behind this. I'll ask it later. So later in the day, when it was more appropriate, I said to Hassan, my translator, can you explain to me why this guy's name's Obama? Because that's a very sort of, contentious name. And he smiled and said, well, you're right, his name is Obama, but he's the head of the bomb squad. So, and it's those sort of experiences that have stuck with me, connecting with people.
Right.
But in terms of, there's a couple of places that I love going back to. I guess I love going back to Iraq because the people are so nice. Pakistan, traveling across Pakistan is just memorable because of just there's so many people in India and Pakistan, and there's just a crazy way that the traffic works, but everything's functional. And just meeting people who are genuinely nice, and then of course along the way you meet people who are genuinely not nice. But certainly, I guess other countries, Vietnam was lovely, and Korea was funny because everything was in Korean. There was nothing in English, so leaving the airport and having to navigate across the country was interesting and a challenge. And I'm glad that there's things like Google Translate that you can, very quickly try and work it out. And then, I did some work in the US down in Louisiana, Port Fourchon, and I had the best chicken there in my whole life. So
yeah, Cajun food down there, some good Cajun food. So what was? If you look at this list of countries, I can think of some cities that I have been in. I've been in 38 states in the United States to do my work, and I've been in some pretty tough cities. I'm from Baltimore originally. I've been in Cleveland and St. Louis and L.A. and Chicago and Philly and places like that. The only other city, excuse me, that I was actually really ever afraid in my entire life, fearful for my safety, was New Orleans, and that was before Katrina. And I consider myself a fairly tough guy. I'm pretty smart, and I used to be a cop, and I have pretty good situational awareness. But that was the only town in the United States that I've ever been to, and I've been in a lot of cities that I thought, I'm going to stay in the hotel. Is there any, if you look at this collection of countries here, is there any place where you say, I'm not leaving the safety of the green zone, the security detail, it's too dicey?
Yeah, I've been at a couple of places like that, and I'm going to exclude the Iraqs and the Yemens and stuff because, you literally can't step outside the security bubble of where you are. But certainly in a few other countries, like I was in Kenya down in Mombasa on a port project, and some of the African countries, it's not about how tough you are, and certainly situational awareness is really important, but it's more about if something goes wrong, who do I call, and what do I do?
Not a lot of friends in the room.
Do I speak the local language?
Right.
And if the answer is no, then I'm relying upon someone else to interpret what I'm saying or doing. What's the medical healthcare? I mean, classic case for me was I was in Egypt and I got a toothache at 2 a.m. and stupid me, I was young in my career. I just asked the front desk, where do I go? Oh, there's a hospital down the road. It's 5 minutes and you'll be there. Well, after 50 minutes of walking, I found a taxi that spoke English, and he took me in, and the doctor, looked at my mouth, and okay, you've got an infection and everything else, and it's 2 a.m, so we're not going to pull the tooth out or anything else. We're going to give you injections. Oh, okay. He turned to the nurse and he said, "Give the man the pink injection."
Uh-oh.
And I just looked at the doctor and said, does the pink injection have a Latin name that you should be able to explain? And he looked at me and laughed and says, look, it's the only one that's coloured pink. And if I say the Latin name, the nurse won't know what I'm talking about.
So did you
So
take
it
the
comes
pink
out
injection,
fine.
and then you woke up and you were in another country, and you were and your head had been shaved, or?
But certainly, as a person travelling the world outside your home city, these are things that you have to start thinking about: is what do I do if something goes wrong? And as a security professional, and I work in the prison system where things went wrong every day. You have to think about it for yourself and not be macho and just say, you know what, as a businessman, and you kind of have to think that way when you're in the private sector, because it's not like being back in government service where you can say, hey, I need backup, and just people turn up and cars turn up and equipment turn up. In the private sector, someone's got to pay for that.
Right.
And so you've got to justify. No one just turns up in a hurry. No one jumps out of an aeroplane and comes to save you. So you really have to be a lot more self-sufficient and a lot more resilient. Your planning has to really be more finely tuned when you start traveling.
So, John, we got about 3 minutes left, and I could talk to you for hours. You and I are good conversationalists, and I love the way that you have a insight in a lot of things that I think are important. Just give me your sense as you look at kind of what's your take on the world these days? United States and with the election in a week and European issues, and it's a broad question. But I mean, what are you feeling hopeful? Are you feeling pessimistic? Where are you on the security scale about how we perceive our country and the rest of the world?
So the first thing is everything goes in cycles, and I was reading just recently about in the Atlantic from the States about a 60-year cycle for people that go through and the world. So sometimes I look at the media and I go, oh my goodness gracious, like what is happening in this part of the world? And then I kind of got to take a step back and sort of put my kind of almost my father's hat on and say, calm down, settle down, take a breath. It'll work itself out. It might not be what you want, but it'll work out. And if I think about, back to the Second World War, and, the whole world was hinged on, a knife's edge about, Europe and the Pacific. And we would say the right people won and life sort of returned to normal. But what is normal? And normal is what we think it is and what we accept it is. So when I see these events around the world and whether it be a tsunami or a hurricane or some sort of terrorist event like 9/11, I've got to kind of sit back and think, okay, so I can't change that as much as I would like to. What do I have to do to move forward? And I've really got to have that hat on and in some ways remain quite positive and just say, you know what can we do to improve what we have and not fall into that easy trap of complaining and whinging about, well, it should have been, it should have been, could have been, but it's not. This is what we've got, and how do we move forward? And I think that's part of it. The second one is just don't give up.
Right. That's the way we feel, yeah. So, John, let me thank you for your time today and just a fascinating career that you have. And I've been talking with John Cowling. He's district security manager for a large construction equipment company in United Arab Emirates in Dubai. He has well-traveled around the world and just a fascinating career. So, John, my friend, thanks very much for coming on Crime Time and talking with me. Let me wrap up here. Thanks for listening to this episode of Crime Time. I encourage you to go to my website at crimetimeradio.com and send me an email with questions or topics you want me to cover on future shows. Connect with me on LinkedIn and follow me on Twitter at Dr. Steve Albrecht. Next week's show, we'll be talking to Ryan Dowd, the executive director of Hesed House. Hesed House is one of the biggest homeless shelters in Illinois. It's about an hour west of Chicago. Hesed House. Ryan Dowd is an attorney and the executive director there, and he has a lot to say about how we see homeless people in our world, and I want to talk to him and hear his thoughts. So in our world, there are sheep and shepherds and wolves. Too many people are sheep and too few people are shepherds. There are a lot of wolves out there. There are not enough police officers or sheriff's deputies to protect us all, so you need to be a shepherd. Take care of yourself and protect your family, your loved ones, your friends, and your coworkers. Pay attention. Be prepared to defend yourself with legal force if necessary. Be a good witness for the police if you see a crime. Stay safe and aware and alert at home, at school, and even on the road. Thanks for listening to Crime Time. My thanks to Jim Whining, producer Matt, producer Jeff, and all the good folks at Acts Media Group. I'm Steve Albrecht, and thanks for listening to What I Know is Right.